All right, so for this week's thing, this was just a show I was catching up on last week, and I was like, oh, we should watch that because it kind of ties into Star Trek. I think I showed you a bit of this show once before. It's called The Orville, or I just showed you the part where the big Klingon-looking aliens, they have cigarettes and they don't understand how cigarettes work.
Yes,
So they're just eating the cigarettes. So there's a couple episodes in particular of this show. This whole show, it's like the spirit of Star Trek, basically, is what it's trying to encapsulate or whatever. And there's this little story that started in the first season that wraps up in the second season. And the two of them together, I'm like, oh, that's actually a good little, if you're just going to try this show, these two are really cool. And they're particularly cool because they do what I feel like Star Trek used to be all about, which is to kind of talk about social issues and weird, just the humanities or whatever, through the lens of a space show, So I guess let's just go quickly through like Star Trek history. So you were a big fan of the original Star Trek.
Definitely.
And you never really got beyond that much, right? It was really just the original.
I watched a few of the others, but they didn't quite grab me.
Right. And and for me, like I'm pretty familiar with the original series, and for me it was The Next Generation was the main one I watched, which is just couldn't be more perfect because I am the next generation of people, so it makes sense. But both of those shows were Gene Roddenberry shows, and you can really tell because like Next Generation this show, The Orville, it's more based on Next Generation, but it's, Next Generation was more like a flying office building, kind of really brightly lit, and everyone is just very, I don't know, it's interesting because in both the original Star Treks, Gene Roddenberry's whole thing was that he wanted to show that in the future, everyone's getting along. Like everybody on Earth is unified in wanting to go out into the stars. So the people on the ship don't get in fights with each other. And they did a little bit in the original over, like McCoy and Spock and Kirk always had that triangle.
But for the most part, they were pretty congenial.
Right.
And they were trying to really show moral issues in other parts of the world.
Right.
And there was always a moral to those stories.
The ones that really stood out to me from original Star Trek were like the people that were half black and half white.
Right.
And then half white and half black. And Kirk just can't fathom how they can't tell that they're the same. But that's a pretty good allegory for just like black and white people on Earth. It's like
exactly, and that's what a whole lot of those stories were about. It was showing what was really going on the Earth at that time, but now those same problems exist in outer space.
And then Next Generation, like I was saying, it's sort of more. I don't know. It was a really interesting move. I thought that instead of Kirk, where Kirk was like the stereotype of Kirk was like he's like always wanting to punch lizard aliens in the face.
Very male.
Yeah, and like if anyone's gonna have sex with a green lady, it's him. Where in Next Generation they went with Patrick Stewart instead, and it's like an old, bald, very
and he's more comes across more as an intellectual.
Right, and that idea of people not infighting is even more so in Next Generation. It's almost weird how much everybody gets along on the ship. They never have, because every show, like literally every TV show, is about petty arguments between the characters. Like that's what the drama is. So it was interesting that with Next Generation, they just were like, nope, like, you can have your problems with the Romulans or whoever, but not within each other, to the point that they even had a Klingon guy on the ship. And Lieutenant Worf was part of them and got along, and if anything, kind of got ostracized from the other Klingons because they're like, what's wrong with you wearing your little Starfleet uniform and stuff? That's not cool. But it was a great show, too, in its own right. Like, if you ever were to look into more Star Trek, it's the one. It's the Patrick Stewart show is worth watching. Then after that, it just devolved more and more and more. There was, like, Deep Space Nine was okay, but they gave up this everybody's together thing. Now it's just like a normal show where everyone's fighting with each other. And then Voyager was the one with Janeway, the female captain, and it's just a bad copy of Next Generation. And of course, Gene Roddenberry was long dead for all these shows. He died halfway through Next Generation. And then after that, I feel like Star Trek really lost its way. That's when they did Enterprise, which was back in the past. And it was Scott Bakula from Quantum Leap.
Yeah.
And it just didn't feel like Star Trek anymore. And it's just been like that. Like nowadays, there's a new Star Trek Discovery show that's also in the past.
A lot of it is just, you're good guy, bad guy, a lot of action.
Yeah.
As opposed to going to a deeper level of a morality that you have to kind of, you can certainly, well, we'll say the old Star Trek as an example. You can look at it on one level, just the action. They're at another place, they see these new creatures, people, whatever, who have issues, and they get resolved. You can just leave it at that level if you want, but you can always go deeper. There is definitely 2 or 3 different lower levels if you think about it, and probably Next Generation is like that too.
Yeah.
But later it just becomes more just black and white.
I think, too, part of it, to oversimplify, but the 2 big space operas are Star Trek and Star Wars. And just to put it, simply, Star Trek is the smart one and Star Wars is the dumb one. but I feel like the people who run Star Trek now are like, man, people should like that Star Wars, though, with all of its big ship battles and bullshit. And that kind of action and stuff just got more and more into Star Trek. And Star Trek just doesn't feel like Star Trek anymore. You can go back and watch the old ones, but the new ones, you could put any name on it. It's not even, they even made a new show with Picard in it, with Patrick Stewart, and it doesn't feel like Star Trek.
Even when people laugh and joke about how simplistic the sets were on the original Star Trek, but that's not what the show was about. The show was about a message, a morality, and therefore you can look past those sets. I mean, there's a famous one, the rocks look like big pieces of pizza.
Right.
But that's okay because the show is not about that. The show is not about the set. It is about the message or what's going on in our world today and how it's existing in these space other worlds. So yeah, the fact that some of the sets were pretty bad and basic, but that's okay. If you've got a good show, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, which again I feel like really ties into the duality between Star Trek and Star Wars, because I've never been a Star Wars fan. I never really understood why people like it because the plots are really bad. But what people would tell me is like, you got to put yourself in the mindset of 1977, and you go to the movie theater and you've never seen a movie that looks like that before. And I'm like, yeah, okay, so special effects wise,
right?
Great.
Special effects wise, absolutely, it's got it in spades.
But what's underneath?
But what else does it have?
So this show, The Orville, basically it's more of a comedy because it's Seth MacFarlane who did that cartoon Family Guy, and Family Guy was a big hit for Fox for so many years that basically he managed to talk Fox into it. He's like, I just love Star Trek. I want to make my own Star Trek type show. Can you please let me make my own Star Trek type show? And they gave him 2 seasons, and now they are making a 3rd season for some other channel, but they got two years out of Fox. And basically it's that Star Trek hasn't felt like Star Trek in 25 years. So he was like, hey, if you guys aren't using this, I'm just going to use it. So this show is almost a carbon copy of Star Trek The Next Generation. It looks the same, it feels the same, it just has more jokes, but it's just like, if you guys aren't going to make Star Trek, I'm going to make Star Trek. And the name The Orville, not a great name, but I guess it's because Orville Wright, made the first airplane, so that's why his ship's called The Orville, but
okay.
I don't know. I'm sure I wouldn't have called it that. I feel like there's got to be a better name. But what's interesting about these episodes in particular, this is my favorite little story. So I feel like it'll be pretty easy to jump into this because it's just, this guy's the captain, this guy's the science officer, this guy's the blah, blah, blah. It's just all the Star Trek shit. And of course, everybody has their own little storylines. But the most interesting storyline to me is the Klingon type guy. He's called the Mocklin in this. And it's just the same thing, big, crazy, warlike bumps on their face, like these warlike people. And they take it to an extra extent where the Klingons in this show, the Mocklin, are a single gendered species. They're only men. And they just are barbaric and warlike and fucking nuts. But one of them is on the ship, just like Worf in Next Generation, exact same type of thing. And what just happened in the episode before this is they give birth through eggs because they're, all males. And the egg hatches and it's a girl. And that was the end of the episode. It's like, what the fuck? The all male crazy barbarians just had a girl. So this episode is about them having a female kid. And again, it's just, I mean, we'll just watch it, and it is very much like the old Star Treks in the sense that it's like, all right, we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about gender stuff through the funny space show, which is just so cool. It's so cool to approach these topics not through some, fucking overly ponderous fucking documentary or something that makes you feel bad. It's like a fun space show, and you get to talk about this stuff. And I always thought this was a good episode, but it's just like, okay, well, that's just a weird thing that happened. But then I caught up on season 2, and they did another episode that follows this further and kind of takes this plot line, to another spot. So I thought maybe we could watch these, because it's not Star Trek, but it's the best Star Trek thing that there is now.
Alrighty, let's go for it.
Yeah, I was surprised too, because I just didn't expect much of this show. Because, I always thought Family Guy was pretty good, but, it's just the other cartoon with a big fat dumb guy that's not The Simpsons. Like, I liked it, but I didn't, like, greatly respect it or anything. So when I heard this guy was making his own Star Trek type show, I'm like, well, whatever, I'm not going to watch that. And then my friend Mike messaged me, and he's like, have you seen this show? Like, I know this, you're not going to believe me, but it's real good. And then he was right. And it's just so nice to bring back those Star Trek feelings, which I think it'll do more for me, because I was more of a Next Generation person. But I don't know, we'll see. I guess we'll see if this does remind you of the original series at all. But yeah, I just thought it was so nice to do like a throwback of, like, instead of like, let's bring Star Trek forward into the present, because it's never worked. It just keeps getting worse. So I like that this show has the balls to just say, fuck it, we like old Star Trek, and we're going to be old Star Trek.
Not my intention to hurt you. I just wanted to do what was right. What is important now is Tupa. It is a good name, and we must give him a good life, whoever he becomes.
I hadn't heard of this show. It was very good.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's like a little under the radar. Like, it's sort of popular, but not really. And again, like, I don't think I would have watched it, except my friend Mike told me to watch it. And even like on Fox, it ran 2 seasons, but now it's not done, but it's moving to Hulu, which is like not a real TV station. It's one of those like Netflix type things. So at least it's still around. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. Just, yeah, it feels like it should be a little more popular, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like way better than modern Star Trek, but modern Star Trek's not popular either. I don't know. Maybe space shows just aren't a thing right now. But yeah, and it's such a weird line that it walks that it's amazing that it gets away with such over-the-top jokes. Like, the jokes are not subtle. They're in your face with how stupid they are. But it's a nice
It's a
mix.
nice balance.
Yeah, because, like, I don't know, like, I feel like if you, say you, like, watched a documentary about female circumcision in Africa or something, not fun. An important topic, but not fun to watch. And this is, like, it's like it sneaks it in almost. It's like a sneaky way to talk about stuff and still just throw in dick jokes and stupid shit to kind of keep it going.
You're right, though. Very reminiscent of the earlier Star Treks.
Right.
In that they're trying to get a message across as opposed to shooting a whole lot of special effects in your face.
Right.
We saw very little special effects in that, actually. I mean, but what they did do was well done, but there wasn't a whole lot of this lights and action and blow-ups, and no, they were telling a story.
Yeah, and in the show, it does that sometimes. Like, it obviously veers around, and all the different characters have their own different species with their own different problems, so, but it is ironic in a way that the most warlike, barbaric ones have, like, the most intellectual background story. But I also think it's cool because it starts doing that thing of, like, oh, look how correct we are, and we're obviously right, there's we're the ones that are right, and these backward ass Mocklins. They don't know what they're doing, but they don't win. At the end, it's like, yeah, well, you can have all your fancy little arguments in your little space tribunal. You're not going to change thousands or who knows how long of this. Like, the aliens really are alien, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's like, especially in Star Trek The Next Generation, like, the Klingons were just, they weren't Klingons anymore. They were just...
Well, and it would have been unrealistic for it to finish off with that culture completely changing just because they had one woman who is their famous writer, actually, who shows up and shows that women are equal. For a whole culture to change would have been like, oh yeah, like, how Hollywood is that?
Yeah.
So to actually have the culture say, no, we're not ready, because the cultural changes take, oh God, more than generations. They take centuries to usually change.
Like an example I was just thinking of was WWE wrestling has this deal where they go to Saudi Arabia and do wrestling shows. And it's so weird to see how that's progressing, where first off, the whole thing is weird because it's like you're getting financed by this fucked up weird country. But initially, they wouldn't let any women wrestlers be on the show. And they've been doing this long enough now that they allow women to be on the show, but they have to wear, normally, wrestlers are like superheroes, they're super athletic and they just don't wear a lot of clothes. In the Saudi Arabia shows, the girls all have to wear full body outfits and big baggy t-shirts. And it's like, okay, we're getting there. At least there's women on the shows, but it's like you really can tell that they're in Saudi Arabia right now.
It's a long time coming, cultural change. So no, that was excellent. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I think it was like the neatest trick. Well, the two things, I thought in a way the all of the arguments during the tribunal, it's surprising how balanced it was. Like the Mocklins aren't wrong, like the best example they have of if you don't give someone corrective surgery is you get to live your life in a fucking cave in the mountains. Like, society's just not ready for that. You are putting a lot of stress on this person if you don't conform their gender. But I also thought writing wise, it's a little, I don't know, their famous writer happens to be a woman and they happen to find her. What I thought they were going to do, which I think kind of would have been better, when the captain was scanning the planet, I thought he was going to blow the lid off some conspiracy where they find out that it's not rare for Mocklin females to be born. It's pretty common, and they just are mass sexual reassignment surgery. They're just doing it en masse across their planet, which would be like horrible. And then you'd have a good argument of like, this society really is fucked up. But maybe that's a little too heavy. I don't know. Maybe that'd be a little much. But I was also impressed with the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer thing, because that's the stupidest joke in the whole thing, that they show Bortus Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and of all the things to inspire him to realize that an obvious deformity can be a benefit, it's Rudolph. It's like, wow, that's stupid. That's really dumb. But then when they give the kid the little Rudolph toy at the end, it's like, man, they even took that really dumb joke and kind of made it into a moment, like it's a really well done show.
I thought that was okay to do that, because we think of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer just as a kiddie story where he leads Santa to Christmas because it's too foggy and the other guys can't see. But by introducing it that way, they actually showed you another level of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Here is this odd duck of a reindeer who doesn't fit in, but saves the day, Christmas, whatever you want to call it. It's that old story that you used to hear parents would always say to you, if somebody was deformed or whatever, and you'd hear stories, well, how do you know, though, they might grow up to find a cure for cancer, or just because they're disabled physically doesn't mean that they're mentally deficient. So don't put them away, don't kill them, don't euthanize them, whatever, because you don't know what they will become when they grow up. Well, they've taken that message and applied it to Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Now, yeah. I mean, I've seen Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer who knows how many times, and I never thought of it on that level.
Yeah, that is, they did it in a very silly way, but that is, I like the the idea behind it, that it's another way to make the aliens really seem alien, is that their interpretation of stuff we take for granted is just different. It's one thing too, I thought it was in this episode, but it must be in another one, where they flesh out a little more about that Moclan culture, and it makes sense. It's that barren planet, they say it's because they industrialized it, but it was always like that. That planet was shit. It was hard to ever survive on that planet, and the only way that species survived for generations and generations was that they were all men, and they were tough-ass motherfuckers, like they were super regimented, super disciplined, and they just barely squeaked by for however long. So
And how
it's so
different
ingrained.
is that than our culture,
Right.
which for years only recognized the male as anything worthwhile. The woman
Right.
was to be barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen, take care of the house, didn't have a brain, was never allowed to, well, good God, couldn't even vote until well into the early part of the 1900s, 1920, I think it was, in Canada, before women got the right to vote. And they were imprisoned, and because men were not willing to have those women.
Right. But even then, like, that's obviously all just bigotry and nonsense. But in this Moclan example, like, what if the literal environment of their horrible desert planet was so shitty that females really couldn't survive and just didn't for
But see,
until it gets ingrained that that's how they're
yeah,
supposed to
see,
be.
those men weren't willing to give them the chance either.
Right. Well, but now obviously at this point they've industrialized and become a spacefaring race, and it doesn't make any sense anymore. But at least there is a reason why this happened initially,
And you take the human race. That was probably the same thing with early man. Early man went out and took on all the risk of killing the wild beasts so that the family could have meat. The wives minded the cave and maybe went around in the local area and did gathering of berries and those extra little things. But the danger of having the human race survive was left to men. Same thing.
Right.
So that's what this was doing. The same way that the old Star Treks used to do it. It was saying, here is a foreign planet, and here's how they are, but that's how Earth either is or was.
And I think it was extremely important that at the end the baby still gets the sex change, because it's not what you expect to happen and it's not what you want to happen. But just from a writing standpoint, if it had not gone that way, it would just feel so back-patty. Like, look at us. Look what we did. We showed these backward-ass fucks.
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying. It would have had one of those happy Hollywood-type endings.
Yeah.
Well, that's not realistic in the real world.
And that's what I think, that's why I like tying this into Star Trek so much. That's how you can really tell the guy Seth MacFarlane who plays the captain, because this was his just dream project he always wanted to make, because he loved Star Trek so much that, he really did love Star Trek. He grew up loving Star Trek. Once he got his chance to make his Star Trek show, he wanted to be true to, like, let's actually look at these things in some kind of way that's not just some schmaltzy nonsense, and it's like, cool. So that was that episode, and I saw that whenever. And that storyline would, kind of bubble away in the background, but they didn't do another distinct episode about this topic until really close to the end of season 2, so many episodes later, and I just finally saw it the other day. So would you like to watch that one
Sure.
and see the wrap-up? Because that's what made me think, like, instead of just showing you this one random episode that is kind of good, it's more satisfying now that there's a more complete thing. But I guess I'll just tell you what happened in the interim is there's these bad guys who I don't remember their name, but they're like the Romulans, but they're like religious fundamentalists. They're really, really, they're the bad guys because they're just so dogmatic. They will never see reason, and it's going to be a war eventually. On top of that robot guy, Isaac, he's part of a robot hive mind, like they were called the Borg in Star Trek, but they went to his planet. Basically, the reason he's on the ship is the robot hive mind doesn't know what it thinks about non-robots yet. Like, they sent him as an emissary to go check it out and see what the deal is. And unfortunately, the robot hive mind decided, nah, I don't like anyone that's not a robot. We're going to destroy everybody. So except, of course, our guy, he rebelled or whatever, and he's still part of the gang. But out in the galaxy now, there's these religious fundamentalist lizard aliens that are bad news. There's the robots that are super duper technologically advanced, and they're coming. So there's a lot of bad shit happening in the galaxy. And it makes it extra important that the unified species stay friends with the Moclan, because the Moclan make all the weapons. So when this war comes, we really need these guys on our side, because without them, we'd have no chance. And now things are going to come to a head again with this whole gender issue, and it's extra a problem now, because like they really can't afford to lose these people. But if these crazy barbarian aliens keep being crazy barbarians with their insane fucking ideas, like how can we be friends with them? You know, it's like they're the worst. Oh, and on a smaller level, Clyden, Bortus's husband, who was also, you know, revealed that he was originally female, he's just been a piece of shit. He totally buys into the Mockless thing. He doesn't like women at all, but he's still there, and he's part of the family unit, and he's on the show, and it's like, I hate this guy. He's the worst. But it's so good also, because it's like, yeah, he's an alien. He's not supposed to be like you, which is just, again, something that even Star Trek didn't do that much. I'm always impressed with this show that they're willing to just be like, you're not supposed to like all the aliens, because they're fucking aliens. They're crazy by our, you know, by our perspective. So that one definitely more optimistic, the ending, but I still like that it's still like this weird compromise ending, you know? Like it's still...
Well, I think they're drawing parallels with the Earth and revolutions and the underdog kind of coming to the surface. You saw it in Cuba, you saw it in South Africa, you saw it in Bosnia. While I was watching that, I was even going as far back as the expulsion of the Acadians when the alien troop attacked and were grabbing the women and forcing them out and going to force whatever they were going to do with them. But I even went back that far. So, and again, any of those things were nothing that happened immediately. You didn't have a quick resolution to it. It took centuries. Decades, centuries for these things to come to fruition. And even when they did, when those groups did survive, they still faced all kinds of social animosity from other people. There was no quick resolution, so this fits right in with the development of humanity. Would be the same with these other things. It's well done, excellently well done.
I like too that even though I feel like this one is even more cut and dried of who's on the right side and who's on the wrong side, but they still went some ways to at least make the Moclans have some kind of leg to stand on when they're doing their debates. Because like from their perspective, the idea that this is a child smuggling ring is like, yeah, that's pretty weird, but if you were them, that is what's happening. You know, they're smuggling kids off of the planet, and
right,
it's like,
and that's their future.
Yeah,
that's they actually they do a good job of showing both sides. It's not all black and white. You can look at both sides and see that they both have a valid claim, one more so than the other. But
and then the way it's neat too. If watching the whole show, where I kind of caught you up on this, the Krill and the Kalon and this background stuff. But it's neat when I was watching the show because that's just other storylines that are happening. Like there's these horrible lizards that are evil, and the robots turn bad, that they tied that in to just kind of add pressure to this situation of like, because if it was peacetime, you'd be like, all right then, leave the Union, who cares, get the fuck out of here. So it's neat that they set up this in the background. Like it's still an episodic show where each episode stands on its own, but this overall thing was a lot more considered than I realized. And like you mentioned that thing I've said in the first episode about there being a bunch of females, you mentioned like, that is kind of the story here. So it's like, oh yeah, maybe they had this idea at the time, but they're like, we got enough going on here,
Yeah, they didn't want to throw it all in. They were they may have an overall thread of how they were going to develop this thing. So you spread it out instead of throwing it all into that first episode that we saw. No, you save that, hold that back, because that's going to fit into your long-term storyline.
It's interesting too watching them back to back because it's been a while since I watched those season 1 episodes, but you can really feel like behind the scenes mandates that were probably going on, where is so distinctly less jokes and more action. And I bet you any money that's what Fox said, was like, hey, how about less jokes, how about more shooty. And then at the end of the season they're like, not good enough, and that's when it got set off to Hulu because it's Fox. They canceled Firefly. They're just famous for canceling shows.
Yeah, anything that seems to have any kind of a depth to it, they seem to move on. Because most of what's on Fox is pretty superficial.
And I remember, Firefly is easy to compare because it was a space show also. It had this, 2-hour premiere episode that was kind of slow, and introduced all the characters. And Fox was like, no, too slow. They had to make a new pilot that had more shooty, bang, and it just wasn't as good. And yeah, it's I feel like that's not happening as brutally here because this is Seth MacFarlane. He's the Family Guy guy. He's, they like him. They don't want to fuck with his show, but they're clearly fucking with the show a little. And that's by far my least favorite part is that I went to the bathroom during it because it's that fight scene. I don't like empty action scenes like that where they get in the big gunfight down on the planet, but no one gets hurt. It's just pointless. That's not what happens in a gunfight. That would have been brutal and awful, but they just threw it in because people like to see guns shoot.
Yeah, exactly. And they're trying to cater to that audience. But most of their shows are rather on the superficial side.
Yeah.
And, you got to throw in a bunch of that stuff because if you start getting too talky and too intellectual, they don't realize there is an audience out there that loves that. They love that intellectual stuff and that kind of second-guessing what people are doing. But if your mindset is that you're gearing for action-packed, and it depends, too, who your advertisers are. I mean, we don't see the advertisers in here. But if your advertisers are people that are action-packed and everybody's got to be beautiful and you got to have quick resolution, and you're getting a little too intellectual, your advertisers will say, you know what, either do what we want or we're taking the money.
It's funny, too, even just the little bit, because this is obviously a TV rip, not a DVD rip that we watched, because at the start it was coming up next on Fox, the Orville, but check out these other shows. And I haven't seen any of those shows, but it's wow, these don't seem the same at all. These all just seem like dumb Fox shows. Yeah, that makes me think, too, I think not every episode of the Orville are these big filibuster debates. It's just we happen to watch these two back to back, but it really makes me think of there's this one Next Generation episode where Picard has to convince some governing body that Data, the robot, is a sovereign being, that being an AI gives him rights. And it's they really are just doing Star Trek again. But thank God somebody is, because no one else is, not even Star Trek, So yeah, it is nice to see again. But yeah, it's obviously the... I don't know, it's neat. It's these the more personal stories are obviously the best episodes. And I do think that guy Bortus's stories are obviously the best. Because there's other ones the girl Alara, who's the really strong chick. Her story, for instance, is everyone on her planet is strong. And it's a weird irony that they're the strongest people in the galaxy, but they don't respect violence. So they're really disappointed that their kid joined the Starfleet. To them it's a bunch of artists, but your kid joins the military, and that's interesting, but the stakes are so low compared to all the stuff happening with the Mocklins. I think that's what makes this the best storyline.
Well, and you get why that Bortus character is so intriguing, because he seems to be showing the more multifaceted sides of a personality, and he is the only one of them that seems to show a conscience, and that he struggles with what is right morally and versus what is right legally. And it's the struggle that engages us with him. because most humans, unless they're really superficial, struggle with what's right, what's wrong, what's black, what's white, what's gray, and he's the only one in those 2 episodes that I really saw with a struggle.
Right.
The human characters seem to know clearly what is right, and we will fight for what is right. But he struggles with what is the human side of what is right and what is his planet's way of what is right.
It was nice too, though. Yeah, even though he's much more more in depth than most of the characters, but I did kind of like too how the union or whatever, when they're having their little meetings, and it's like, obviously the fact that they need guns really is the main problem here, but they at least didn't make them as black and white, because it's really frustrating sometimes in shows like this where the bureaucracy is just the bureaucracy, and
Yeah.
they don't even give those people any gray area. And here at least there's a little, it's still like annoying. It's like,
Yeah, they struggle with, the union struggles with, they know what's morally right too, and what they should do and what they should stand up for. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the God almighty dollar, the guns, the power, and that's the human condition. What is right versus the power, the haves versus the have-nots. You should make morally the right decision, but there's always that big but, and that's what that union represents. So yeah, no, it's a very well done show.
Yeah, because I like too the resolution here. Also, similar to the first one of just this, not the ending that you want to have happen. And really, it is. Now that I think about it, it's actually a pretty crap resolution for the good guys, where it's really the only deal they made is like, just don't kill these women. Everything else horrible you're doing, keep doing it. We'll stop, the Underground Railroad. Just don't kill these ones, and that's the best. That's the best you get out of it. But I guess it's better than nothing.
But you know what? That's and they kept talking about the history. But that is the story of history. That you hardly ever get a nice, clean, once and for all decision.
Yeah.
You get a little piece, and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. But at the time, it seems like a victory. But it's never a yay, hey, victory. It's a, yeah, we got a little bit.